Thank you, Madam Chairman. Back when I was first elected to the Senate, Congressman Blumenauer took me out on the the Willamette River for a 10-mile stretch, Portland Harbor Superfund site. And he said, this has been going on for 10 years. This has to be resolved before I retire. Well, he retired last January. And I've watched this with enormous frustration. Essentially, the projects involves testing the soils along this 10-mile stretch, deciding what to excavate, what to cap, and then doing those two things, and what to leave to natural erosion and natural process. So finally, 17 years after it was listed, there was a record of decision about what to do. Still, basically nothing has happened for cleanup. And it appears to me that the process is stalled, waiting for resolution about who among the potentially responsible partners will pay what, which means all kinds of lawyers being hired every which direction, all sorts of subgroups being formed to challenge the EPA's decision in court. I think it's gone now through 3 rounds of testing the river, because every 7 or 8 years, it's like, oh, well, maybe the river's changed. Maybe we need to re-examine where the contaminants are. How do we stop this eternal process of planning and actually do the dam cleanup? Do we need to dive into the cleanup after the record of decision and not wait for the potentially responsible partners to sort out who will pay for it? How do we avoid this now that we're 25 years now into this project? And I think this is emblematic of what has happened in many Superfund sites. Whoever feels like they have the best insight on how to fix this.
So, I'm involved in a lot of that litigation that you talked about, so I'll speak against interest here, but those transaction costs should never slow down the cleanup. EPA has many tools. I mentioned a couple, but they have other enforcement tools to bring the parties forward to do the work. They have to create the incentives for those parties to do it so that you can't go to the same companies, deep-pocketed companies, every time and say you have to pay 100% of the costs, and you figure out how to sue the other 100 parties and spend 10 years in litigation doing that. That is inefficient. And so I agree with you. I know the Portland Harbor site. Contaminated sediment sites are more complex than your typical site, but there are examples where they have been a remedy selected in 2 or 3 years and the work started and partially completed. And so that remedy selection process is the obstacle. It's not private parties suing. That can happen separately, completely separately from the actual remedy selection and the cleanup.
So the remedy in this case was the record of decision was made. Should the federal government be paying for the work until the potentially responsible partners sort out who pays for it?
There's many options that they have. One is they could do the work themselves and seek to recover it later. 2, they could have the private parties come forward and do that, but in order to incentivize the private parties to do that, those private parties want to know that they're not going to be in years and years of litigation to recover. And if there's 100 parties at the site and the federal government says, you 4 do it, and then spend the rest of your time going against those other 96, that is inefficient.
Okay, well, it's massively complex, and I've watched as personnel have changed in terms of trying to drive the process forward. I think there's probably several dozen very well-intentioned employees of EPA who have burned out over the process of trying to drive this forward in the context of the lawsuits and resistance and re-examining. I would like to see the work done and get on with other challenges as opposed to spending endless years and endless amounts of money planning, replanning, trying to figure this out. And if it requires major changes in how the law is designed, I want to understand those and see if we can make this process work more effectively. I am extremely concerned now about the cuts to EPA's staff and how that may reverberate in terms of people continuing to drive the process forward. My whole impression has been that the potentially responsible parties understand every strategy for delay and are pursuing those because They don't want to pay out, and this is going to be $1 billion cleanup. They don't want to pay for $1 billion cleanup, and so they've been very effective at working that angle, and having EPA competent staff are essential to keep the project moving forward. I'm afraid with reductions in those staff, we may see the problem just get worse.